and just to let that conversation ripple out a little further. Some of the questions we began with and have been following during these last few days have been, can we use environmental work around water as a case study for the lessons and challenges for healthy community engagement? What role do human resources play in the conservation and preservation of natural resources? How necessary is the work of conflict transformation, peace building, and social equity in ensuring access to water, in particular worldwide? How do we, and we spent a lot of time on this, how do we develop and integrate multiple strategies regarding issues of water, taking into account political, social, economic conditions in any given place, and how they impact the access and use and sharing of resources like water? How can lessons of water and conflict management be applied to other resources? How do we learn from this field and share it in other fields about how we foster cooperation in a time of interdependence? And on a larger way of looking at things, we also spend a little time talking about, so what does all this mean and contribute to what it means to be a citizen of the earth in the 21st century? How do we reclaim that and redefine that in education, for instance? So we've asked 5 of our participants to share some of their story and their life work with you. And to introduce and moderate this session, and there will be time for question and answer later on, I'd like to introduce Jeff.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I want to welcome you all to the Wilson Center. I'm Jeff DeBelko. I have the good fortune to direct the Wilson Center's Environmental Change and Security Program. And in this instance, it means the good fortune of having worked with Mark Nepo and Fetzer Institute in what is a 3-year collaboration between the Wilson Center and the Fetzer Institute. We're in year 2, and we're on day 4 of a really intense set of dialogues and collaborations with some really, as Mark pointed out, outstanding people really coming from all over the world, from a scholar, from a practitioner, from a policy perspective. And I think we've had some very productive discussions, and if the publication from last year's discussion is any indication, what we will be able to capture with Megan Scribner's and Lauren Herzer's help from this year, it should be very rich again. As Mark suggested, we wanted to share some of the really rich insights and diverse experiences from some of our participants. We could have had any of them, frankly, be up here. This, I think, will be a very interesting combination for you that touches on some of the water conflict and cooperation, the larger natural resources conflict and cooperation questions, but also brings in another area of activity that we in the Environmental Change and Security Program work on, which is integrated development, and particularly population health environment programs. And so we have 2 practitioners who will share their experiences in working on these issues. And in many ways, for me, it's been fascinating to see these worlds interacting in some of these conversations. So it's a terrific honor for us at the Wilson Center, who, as I think many of you know, we are a nonpartisan, non-advocacy institute that's actually the formal memorial to Wilson, bringing the worlds of scholarship and policy together in this forum where these worlds can communicate, can learn from one another in a fashion that where all perspectives are most welcome. So I'm going to introduce all of our panelists. They're going to have, kind of by definition, relatively staccato presentations to give you a taste of the experience and their perspective and what they're working on. We have the good fortune in this instance today to have our formal discussion till 5 and then continue the conversation with a reception that'll just be across the landing. So you'll have a chance to follow up. So if we don't get to your question or we don't drill down quite as far with the speakers on any one particular topic, you'll have that opportunity to do it. Before I introduce them and turn the floor over to the panel, I will also say we're webcasting today's event live. And really all that means for you here in the room is when it comes to the Q&A period, my colleagues will have some roving microphones. If you could use the microphone and let us know who you are when you pose your question, then the folks watching online will know who you are and actually hear the question. I'll introduce them in the order that I'd like them to speak, and I haven't even kind of told them that, so now they'll find out when they're going to talk. Aaron Wolfe is going to kick us off. Aaron is at Oregon State University Department of Geosciences, has just become chair, so we'll see his productivity decline massively. But fortunately, he's worked quite a bit before these bureaucratic duties have taken him astray, and is really a world leader in understanding the interaction between states around water. And from both conflict, but most importantly, has a story to tell us about the cooperative aspects of water between states. And so Aaron's going to open with some reflections there. We're then going to go to the Middle East and look at a specific case, and Gidon Bromberg, who is one of the 3 co-directors of Friends of the Earth Middle East. Gidon and his organization work at multiple levels on these very same water sanitation challenges, a range of, it's not just limited to water, but really, not surprisingly, given the region, a big focus on water, and really talk about how we don't need to kind of fall back into despair, even in the face of some of the most challenging environments, conflictual environments, whether you're looking at environmental indicators, social indicators, or conflict indicators. It's a tough neighborhood. But nevertheless, we see some real innovation in addressing them, and Gidon is here to share that with us today. Then we'll hear from Shewaye Deribe and Joan Castro. Shewaye is coming from Ethiopia, where he is working, I mentioned this integrated development, population, health, and environment. He's a project coordinator of the Ethio Wetlands and Natural Resource Association, an on-the-ground NGO that's working in the field, bringing these different worlds together with integrated programming, meeting the integrated challenges that people in this country face. Joan Castro has a program that really, frankly, has been one of the pioneering programs, the iPopcorn program in the Philippines, where she's at Path Foundation Philippines. And Joan and her colleagues in the Philippines have, in many ways, really had a longer time innovating in this area, and so can even talk about, even with some hardcore research and controlled comparisons, about how we're seeing the real benefit of integration rather than single sector approaches. So we'll look to that Philippine experience. And then batting cleanup is our friend Juan Dumas, who is Argentinian, now based in Quito in Ecuador, where he's the senior advisor of Futuro Latinamericano. He's going the opposite direction of Aaron. He has just shed his bureaucratic duties as the head of the institution, and now is a senior advisor and can think a bit. Although Juan is certainly a doer, as are his colleagues in terms of playing roles in conflict mediation, mitigation, dialogue facilitation in natural resource conflicts all around Latin America, frankly around the world, but with a focus on Latin America. And he'll have some reflections on ways forward since we're sitting in Washington and have access, or in some cases you're part of the donor assistance community, talking about some of the mechanisms of what we can do to be most effective in supporting these processes. So Juan will go last. So Aaron, I will stop talking and turn the floor over to you.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks both to Wilson Center and to Fetzer. It's a really exciting partnership, and it's always a joy to be here with the Wilson Center, whom I know, and now learning more about Fetzer. It's a very exciting relationship to be developing. I'm going to ask for a lot of sympathy from the audience for a number of reasons. I'm an academic who thinks in 55-minute blocks, and I've been asked to keep it to 10 minutes. I'm a PowerPoint addict, and I've been told to tell stories. So if you're sitting like this, can you just kind of open up, give a little bit of sympathy, a lot of empathy towards this recovering PowerPoint addict. Stories. So I think the easiest way to do it is kind of weave what I've learned over the years with how I've gotten to be able to investigate what I investigate. And I start growing up both in California and in Israel. We went back and forth a lot between the West Coast and the Middle East. And both are places where water is subtext to politics. And those, I mean, the Middle East has certain tensions, but Northern California and Southern California, that's some real tension, and especially over things like water resources. And so I knew inherently that water and politics were intertwined, and spent time in Israel later as I started to get trained, getting really interested in the idea that water resources were intertwined with the Arab-Israeli conflict because it seemed so practical. I'd always been involved in politics growing up and as an undergrad, and at some point you get tired of banging your head against the political wall. There's only so far to get when both sides are telling accurate, true, believable stories, and neither side can agree beyond that. And then when you find out that there's a resource that's shared that both need, and there is a history of people talking about it, it starts to get very exciting. And so understanding that now, at the same time, I should say, in the academic world, there's a growing documentation about the coming wars of the 21st century are going to be about water resources. And there was a huge literature. The environmental security literature was rife at the time with the wars of the 21st century. Water will be the new oil, and so on. And so a couple of things happened. One, I decided I needed technical training. And the technical training, I worked for an agency. I don't know who's here from federal agencies, so I won't name it. It's a federal agency that surveys geology. I was a groundwater flow modeler. I only knew water in its digital form, and was pretty bad at it, to be honest with you, and also got that wasn't where my passion was, and that the technical sides weren't really where the action was. Over and over, you could show an optimized solution where it made such logical, rational sense that somebody should make decision X, and over and over again they would make decision Y. So I recognized that the technical was important to understand and gave me a lot of credibility in the room, but wasn't sufficient. And so went back to school then to get training in conflict resolution, policy analysis, and again, it's what we're taught is a fairly rational model, and I'll get back to that in a sense. At this point, I want to tell this story because I promised I would. I go to Israel to do my PhD dissertation on the impact of scarce water on the Arab-Israeli conflict. And there's a beautiful story of the creation of the Jordan River that I hope Gidon's not going to tell, but if he is, I got there first. That the three branches, those who know the geography, there are three headwaters of the Jordan, and originally there were three separate streams. And they would all bicker amongst themselves over who was the most important, which was the most important stream. And so they called on Lord of the Universe to come and judge between them. And there's actually a spot till today, Tel Dan in Hebrew or Tel El-Kadi in Arabic means hill of the judge in both. And it's actually the source of the Jordan's name. Jordan means Yored Dan, flows from the judge, flows from. And so God descended and he said to them, rivers, you are dear to me, all three, unite together and you'll indeed become the most important stream. And that kind of became a theme for understanding how, even as people were talking about the conflict potential, everywhere you looked, there were people talking about water, uniting together across boundaries, being willing to share, in a lot of cases because there was no choice. And the Middle East was the classic example. So I went looking to investigate how water had been a source of conflict over history, and it has been, tensions certainly, and small-scale violence, but more so that there had been explicit and implicit cooperation going back to the beginnings of the state, which got me as the scientist starting to think, well, if that's true in the Middle East, that everybody's pointing to as the source of water wars, what's going on in the rest of the world? And that turned out to be the case in all of the world where people were talking about conflict. India and Pakistan signed a treaty, and it's held since 1960. And Azerbaijan and Armenia have been quietly negotiating and making their governments allow them to talk even when they won't talk about anything else. The Mekong Committee. Everywhere you look around the world, there is this case of people being willing to talk about about water when they won't talk about anything else. So a couple of things came out. One, that water is a wonderful way to have regional dialogue. It's an entry point that people are willing to enter. It's a language that people have in common. And when we talk about water, because it's connected to everything we do, we end up talking about our shared vision of a future, and can use that as a way to have wonderful conversations at all scales, from international down to the local. The other lesson for me was that as a scientist, we need to know way more before we start making projections about war and peace. And so that launched for me a project called the Transboundary Freshwater Dispute Database, where we tried to compile the rich experience of people's interactions over water, both conflictive and cooperative. Brian Blankenspoor is here. He was with us as a student for years and years and helped build this into a major facility. Now he does, I don't know, he runs the GIS for the World Bank or something like that. So it's been downhill, clearly, since leaving Oregon State. But the idea that you need data and you need good technical understanding in order to have these very deep, passionate conversations. I think I've got a couple of minutes. So half of what I do is that. It's count stuff. It's look at trends. It's look at data. It's look at, and to be able to make more accurate projections about what may or may not happen in the security realm. The other half of my time is spent as a practitioner in the room with generally angry people, trying to get them to talk about these issues, which got me interested in this second track in my career, which is how do we have those conversations better? And those of us trained in Western ADR are trained in a rational model. The idea that conflict is about interests, and when the interests of cooperation are greater than the interest of conflict, people will cooperate. Well, that's nice, but nonsense. Not nonsense. It works to a point, but anybody who's been involved in conflict knows that rationality is, anybody who's in a relationship knows that conflict is not necessarily all about rationality. And that there's other sides to it. And so that got me really interested in this process, the transformative moments in discussions. There's a technical political science term, the aha moment, when people in a room suddenly get things differently. And so as a scientist, I start to ask, well, how do we learn more about those moments of transformation? And you look around for models, and they don't exist in the rational world, because in the rational world, it's just about piling on the benefits. They exist in our experiences in the world. If, God forbid, we get sick, or somebody we know gets sick, or we have a child, and our world is suddenly transformed. I mean, in a moment, suddenly transformed. And this was the hard part for me as a scientist to even think about, and it exists in spiritual transformation, which leads to the very interesting set of questions. If there are these spiritual traditions around the world that for millennia have focused on transformation, are there contexts and lessons that we can learn from those constructs that can help do our jobs better in facilitating dialogue? Are there things? Now, two things happened at this time. One, I got tenure, so I couldn't be fired for asking that question. And two, I had a sabbatical, so I could spend the following year going around the world, sitting in different spiritual contexts, learning about constructs of anger, learning about constructs of conflict, and learning about the tools and settings that people in these settings use to help aid in transformation, with an eye towards using them in facilitation mediation. So this is now a whole second part of my work. It's funny, this week I'll spend one meeting talking about satellite photo and melting glaciers in the Himalayas, and the next talking about helping to calm people's anger by matching their breathing and slowing it down. This is a Buddhist meditation technique that I've learned to use in conflict collective setting. So I think my time's just about up. These are the tracks that I've taken to get to this very kind of complex and holistic and I think now more balanced world for me in both having the grounded rational data to approach a problem, but also understand the less tangible, the more spiritual, the more esoteric side to have the conversation. I want to end just with one more brief story. It turns out that the Buddha was a water mediator. I don't know how many of you know that, but he actually did facilitate. There were two tribes who were fighting over a river. And classic, I mean, any of us would recognize it as a classic water conflict. And the Buddha saw it from afar, instantly transported there, hovered above in the center of the river. It's not something I've gotten down just yet. And asked the warring parties, he said, what are you fighting over? Well, we're fighting over the water. And what's the worth of the water? It's our livelihood, it's this, it's that. Is the worth of the water greater than the worth of the blood you're about to spill? And that stopped it on the spot. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aaron. A hard act to follow. So my name is Gidon Bromberg, and as Jeff had announced, I'm the Israeli director of Friends of the Earth Middle East, and we truly are a unique organization. We're the only regional organization that involves Israelis and Palestinians and Jordanians in any field, environment, water, or anything else, as a single organization. And the stories that I'm going to share with you really build on Aaron's stories, and I'm going to steal his Jordan River next time. But talk more to how we've developed programs that through water help build understanding. I wouldn't jump so quickly to say that build peace, but certainly build understanding between people that are in the midst of conflict. We work on water because of the interdependent nature of the resource, that all of the major sources of water in the Middle East are shared by one or more countries, and that interdependence necessitates a level of cooperation. And that's what we try to foster, both an understanding of and a practice of. And we do that in two ways. Firstly, we work out of three offices. We work out of Amman, where our Jordanian director and Jordanian staff sit. We work out of Bethlehem, where our Palestinian director and Palestinian staff sit, and out of Israel, where I sit together with our Israeli staff. We're at about 50 staff in the organization, so we're quite large. We work in two ways. We work top-down by preparing reports, but quite uniquely. Reports on shared water, reports on the River Jordan, reports on the Dead Sea, reports on shared groundwater, the mountain aquifer. But quite uniquely, those reports are written by Palestinians and Jordanian and Israeli experts together, so that we have a common understanding of why the river or the water resource is important, what's happened, what's gone wrong, and what's the vision that we can share to correct it. And we're talking about serious problems of the Jordan River south of the Sea of Galilee basically being a sewage canal, where all of its water, 98% of its fresh water today, are diverted by Israel, by Jordan, by Syria. And in exchange, it's been turned into a sewage canal where Israel, Jordan, Palestine emit their sewage into the river instead. The Dead Sea, which has received a fair amount of attention, is dropping dramatically. It's lost a third of its surface area in the space of some 50 years. Instead of 80 kilometers long, it's only 50. It drops by over a meter in depth every year because of human activities, predominantly the Jordan River no longer flowing and extraction of mineral in the south. And the mountain aquifer, heavily, increasingly polluted because of the lack of sanitation facilities and communities, Israeli and Palestinian, that are on top of the aquifer, and of course the issues of sharing, which are not fairly shared in the region, with the mountain aquifer being the example of Israel taking some 80% of the water and Palestine receiving 20%. Of the waters. So in those framework, we deal with the shared water resources and come out with a vision that is a shared vision. But then the Jordan office advocates that vision to the Jordanian government, the Israeli office to the Israeli government, the Palestinian office to the Palestinian Authority. And that's proven to be very effective because the same vision, but it's articulated by Palestinians to Palestinians, Jordanians to Jordanians, Israelis to Israelis. That's been complemented by top-down activities that are at the grassroots, at the community level, that involve communities along the Jordan River, around the Dead Sea, on top of the mountain aquifer, where the shared water is so visual to the communities. They can see the river that runs through or runs past, the sewerage that runs through, or the springs that represent the groundwater. And there we've built activities that bring the neighbouring, every pair of neighbouring communities together. We work with young people, we work with schools and create water trustees where we bring young people to learn how to build rainwater harvesting facilities or how to create wetlands to reuse grey water. And then they go and actually build such systems in their own schools. Important for water, because that's means of increasing water supply, but equally and just as important for peace, because it's an empowering moment. In the midst of conflict, people feel helpless. There's nothing I can do. This is way beyond me. I certainly can't improve my reality. That is the outcome of intense conflict. So by empowering young people to go out and improve their water reality with their own hands, they learn together and then they build the facilities within their own communities. That's a powerful lesson, not only in conflict, but in life in general, that you can make a difference, and that's done through water. Not only does it empower the youth, but it helps create peacemakers, people that never intended to be leaders on cooperation in their community, but found themselves having to defend themselves. Teachers and school principals that have joined our program, and today in the 25 communities that we work in Palestine, in Jordan and Israel, we are working in almost all of the schools in these communities, and we're talking about thousands of school children. School principals that in a parents' teachers' night will have to defend themselves because one of the parents will stand up and condemn them for working with the other side, for being a collaborator, because they've allowed this joint project, this cross-border project, to invade their school. And suddenly the school principal has to stand up and say, I'm a collaborator, I'm enabling your kids to come to school without having to bring a bottle of water, because water scarcity in many of the communities are so severe that you cannot guarantee that every time you turn the tap, there'll be water flowing out. I'm the collaborator. I'm improving the educational ability of your kids. I'm facilitating girls to come to school, because when there's no water in the school, the bathrooms are closed. There's nothing to flush toilets with, and therefore girls are not sent to school because the parents will not allow the girls to go out into the fields while they will allow the boys. So the social implications of not having water and the peace implications of the school principal standing up and defending his actions. And this is a true story. The only parent that left the room was the parent that got up and condemned the teacher, because the teacher was able to convince the rest of the parents there that he was doing the right thing. And we work with adults. We've created neighbours' path tours that look at the water reality in every community by stopping in stations. We've had, in the last 2 years, over 10,000 Israeli, Palestinian and Jordanian adults partake in the Neighbours' Path trails, generally in their own community. They see some of the beauty that they might have known, because in every stone, underneath every stone in our part of the world, there's incredible history. But they also see the back door. They see what's happening to the sewerage. They're asked to think about where is their water coming from. And they always stop at the border and talk about the water reality on the other side and how that might be different. And another story that comes out of that is that we've also tried to bring tour guides. And in this case, an Israeli tour guide, a group of Israeli and Palestinian tour guides doing the Jordanian Neighbours Path tour. And at the end of the tour, when we're having a discussion, Jordanians, Palestinians and Israelis, the tour guide that had been bringing Israeli tourists to Jordan for 15 years, since the signing of the peace treaty, came and said, well, for the first time, I've realized that for 15 years I've been bringing Israelis to Jordan to look at stones, to go to Petra, and to go to Jarash, and to talk about the past. And at the Neighbours Path tour, where he was coming to a community, a Jordanian community, and meeting residents from the community, and talking to residents, and meeting the mayor, for the very first time he said, well, now I can talk about the present, and I can talk about the future, because the water issues compel us to talk about our future. So again, water being an opening for a transformational moment, that the way I was doing things in the past can so much be improved for the betterment of our common future. And then for the mayors, we've seen incredible leadership from mayors, the mayors of the Jordan River jumping as an annual event into a clean area of the Jordan River in their bathing suits, Palestinian, Jordanian, Israeli, because they're the ones that are missing out. It's their lost economic opportunities by the waters of the Jordan being diverted and the Jordan being turned into a sewage canal. Millions of people would want to tour the Jordan River, be baptized if they're from the Christian faith in the river. But the river is a border area that has a fence that is heavily restricted, and even if in the few locations where you can have access, you wouldn't want to you wouldn't want to jump into the water, because you'd quite likely come out with a rash if you would have a cut in your skin. So we see mayors cooperating together, again having to defend their actions, because everything we do, because there are so many spoilers out there in the midst of conflict, unlike in California or in where water is always under competition. In the Middle East, you're condemned for working with the other side, and that condemnation risks your life. So you always have to prepare and strategize your programming to empower. So we're moving forward on a peace park between Israel and Jordan at the confluence of the Yarmouk and the Jordan rivers. And the mayor on the Jordanian side that has to defends himself by job creation. 40% of his community in Muaz Ben Jabal is unemployed. They're dependent on agriculture, which pays terribly, and therefore there's massive unemployment. And he has seen through the cooperation at the community level and then with his Israeli mayors that there's a new opportunity by creating the first peace park that enables Israelis to come to Jordan without a visa or showing a passport, and Jordanians to come to Israel. In this enclosed bubble, an economic study that we undertook showed that some 500,000 tourists would want to come and see, and that would be a tremendous aspect of job creation. And that was the underlying element that enabled him to stand up against the trend. For us, it's also the model, the first step, the economic engine that would help justify bringing fresh water to the river. to bring environmental health back to the river, and also to enable the river to be shared further downstream with Palestinians that currently can't access the river because it's so polluted and they can't access it politically anyway. But also as a concrete model of peace. The very first, and we're optimistic that this will be the first peace park. The first peace park not only between Arabs and Israelis, but the very first peace park in the Middle East, because there aren't any peace parks throughout the Middle East. So there's traction, and this links with the bottom-up, links with the top-down. We have an advisory committee that's made up of Israeli, Palestinian, and Jordanian government officials that are today sitting and meeting and discussing the rehabilitation of the River Jordan. The US Senate has passed a resolution in 2007 calling on the governments to work together to rehabilitate the Jordan, to use water as a mechanism for peace building, confidence building, that speaks to so much more than just environment. It speaks to livelihood, speaks to economic and social betterment that in the Middle East we so desperately need. And what our work is showing that water is an appropriate, is somewhat a unique engine that helps spurn that forward. So I'll stop with there.
Are you going to do it here? Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Shewaye. I'm from Ethiopia. When I see my side, we are from 5 different parts of the world, from Latin America, from Africa, from Asia, and from North America. But we are talking about the same issue, about water, and we talk about similar things. So this shows that water is common for all of us because it is the base of our life, our survival. And the freshwater resource, which is the base of our life, it's one of the most limited resources in the world. And this resource, it is nowadays shortening due to the climate change and different management problems which occur in the watersheds. For example, we are talking about this conflict which is related to water. Why we go into conflict? We all are humans. We know that all of us need water. So I think it is lack of altruism, lack of mutualistic thinking, which leads us to this type of conflict. So to avoid this type of problem, I think all of us, we have to cooperate irrespective of our political boundaries, because water and other natural sources, they bypass political boundaries. For example, my country, Ethiopia, it is a mysterious country. I know that all of you know that the country is one of the poorest countries in the world and highly suffering from climatic problems and associated conflicts and other things. The country is still mysterious because it is source for 12 big water basins. These water basins are supplying water for people, more than 200 million people within the country and beyond the country, beyond the boundary, especially in countries like Sudan and Egypt. So when we see, I'm here just to share you my experience, especially in relation to water resource of Ethiopia and the prevailing situation. And especially my organization, Ethiopia Wetlands and Natural Resource Association, our experience to reverse the current situation. Generally, the climatic change, again, rapid population growth, again, watershed degradation. These are the major things which are affecting the source of water. I have here PowerPoint presentation. Maybe if I have time later on, I can show you some of the pictures. So generally, this watershed degradation, it is killing the source of water, because the fresh water, it is stored in the wetlands, again forests, and also in mountain tops. But nowadays, due to degradation of the watersheds cannot store water. So the watersheds will not regulate the flow of rivers. After rainfall, the water will go automatically to downstream. That will result in rapid flooding, which causes death of people and animals downstream, and also loss of infrastructures. At the same time, this running water carries large amount of fertile soil from uplands. Therefore, people living in the upstream getting starved. They are suffering due to loss of resources, loss of productivity of the land. Downstream dwellers, they are also suffering from high silt accumulation in the dams and other water storage structures. When we see the capacity of the upstream has no capacity to restore the water stores. That means the forests, wetlands, and other ecosystems. So this thing is creating potential for potential conflicts, because the downstream needs water. The upstream, again, needs water. The population is growing. Again, together with development, some growth or developmental stages, the demand for water also increasing, both within Ethiopia and the downstream countries which are receiving water from the country. So how can we harmonize these downstream users and upstream users' need for water, especially in this changing climatic situation? So to reverse this situation, my organization, Ethiopia Wetlands and Natural Association, it's a small organization and working in 2 places in the Nile Basin. We are implementing community-based projects. These community-based projects, they focused on different activities. These activities are very much integrated. The activities focus on population issue, especially on family planning. The activities also focus on water and sanitation. That means providing clean water for people. The activities also focus on watershed management. How can we rehabilitate the watershed? How can we stop rapid soil degradation? How can we stop movement of silt from the upland and accumulation of silt downstream? How can we improve the water storing capacity of the upland? In addition to that, this activity also focuses on livelihood improvement of people, because the increasing people, it is poor. These poor people, they are dependent on natural resources. So if the dependence of poor people on natural resources continues, degradation of the environment will continue, then the shortage of water will continue. And that will create favorable situation for conflict. And that will create complicated situation for future generation. Therefore, the steps which are to be taken today will also contribute not only for the present generation, but also for the coming generation. So our activities are very much focused on this area. It is just to reverse the current land degradation and avoid, or at least mitigate, conditions which stimulate or fuel conflict situation. Maybe if I have time, I can show some pictures, just pictures, or
Sure, go ahead. Yeah, should we? You want to do that now, or do you want to, or should we?
or else
Why don't we go through and then we can have the discussion. We will certainly have links to all these organizations and some of the slides available on the website. Why don't we have Joan and Juan, and then we'll have opportunity to see that, because seeing it, of course, is very powerful, as the geographers tell us, right? Yeah. Please join.
Good afternoon. First, I'd like to thank Wilson Center and Fetzer Institute for this opportunity to share with you our experience from the other world. And this is from a country called Philippines. And I would like to start my sharing with you by describing the Philippines, because it will put into context the concept of what we call population health and environment, that is an approach, sustainable approach for development that supports linkage of these various sectors. And it is a way that we were able to address some of the issues of poverty alleviation and food security, which are source of conflicts, because of it involves a lot of the natural resources. So the Philippines is a country of 7,100 islands. So it depends if it's actually high tide or low tide. So we are a very small country, but our population, I was looking at this morning, is about more than 90 million. So we're actually the 12th most populous country in the world. Our growth rate is 2.04, and we are considered a hotspot in terms of marine biodiversity, one of the 25. So we boast of very nice beaches and good coral reefs, but unfortunately in the past 50 years, the coral reefs, which is also the habitat for the fish, has actually been going down. So Filipinos, 80% of us, the source of our protein is actually fish. So the natural resources, particularly the marine coastal area, is very, very important. It's also the source of livelihood. And when we studied, had some studies in 2001 when we were starting the project, a majority of the community that we were starting to work with were saying that the resources are dwindling and there's not enough food to go around. So that is actually where we started that situation, and the findings with the community started the project called Integrated Population and Coastal Resource Management. So it was made in such a way that it's easy for us to remember, and because we targeted the youth, we targeted fisher folks, we work with policymakers to be able to try this new approach of integrating different sectors and try to get some synergy in integrating these various sectors. And the reason is most of the programs, and I think in that's kind of universal, that programs are usually vertical programs. So even if the health department is very close, the other side is the agriculture, they don't talk to each other. So that was one part of the project. A multi-sectoral collaboration was encouraged. It applied multidisciplinary approaches. So we looked at food security as the central theme. And basically because of the situation that I mentioned. We initially worked in 4 municipalities. And during that time, PHE was not a common approach. So when you look at the web, there was nothing. So we were starting to do a work that has not been there previously. So that was a big challenge. So we started our way with 4 municipalities, working in areas where there's a remote access to transportation and services. So they're really far-flung areas. And the Philippines, about 80% are Catholics. Addressing issues of family planning as part of population is also very controversial. So we had 4 initiatives that we did. So it's a mix. One is building capacity of the community to be able to have community-based family planning service. So in some communities that we went to, they never saw a doctor ever since, for their whole lifetime. So a doctor is a god in those areas. And then also capacitating the community to be able to manage their resources. And so the project helped establish or strengthen protected areas or fish sanctuaries that were there. We work with local executives to be able to see the links of integrating population, health, and environment. And also we had to make these leaders be able to be our champions for the rest of, as we scale up the project. So there's also a livelihood component, which was mentioned, which is very important. And this is an activity of the Coastal Resource Management Initiative. Because when you actually strengthen or establish a marine protected area, the fishing ground of the fishers, you would have to push them further away to fish. So the alternative livelihood allowed the wives of the fishers to be able to gain skills and be able to have access to microcredit financing and enable them to be able to contribute to the income of the family. So most of these families that we have would have like 5 to 13 children. Some would have 14, and so when you count, they say how many is it, the living or the dead? So when that's how the way to count, because children is wealth, and I guess that's very common in countries like developing countries like ours. So as Jeff mentioned, we also have an operations research. That was also alongside as we did the implementation of the project. So we looked at the synergy. So we did biophysical surveys at the household level, at the biophysical level, and we did a baseline in 2001, did one in 2004, and then one in 2007. Some of the results of the projects were that we were able to increase access to family planning because we had worked with convenience stores, small kiosks that were the only ones available in the villages, to be able to provide family planning commodities such as condoms and pills. And we were able to train also peer educators, both youth and couples, to be the motivators, to be able to talk about how to manage families and how to protect your natural resources. And then the youth was a different target group that we work in. So it's becoming stewards of the future and becoming responsible of your sexuality. So those were the activities that we've had. So we increased access. We were able to pass and work with local policymakers to pass policy reforms that would protect the natural resources and to establish marine protected areas for them to take care of. And we also were able to have capacitated leaders that advocated from local chief executives to the next local chief executives about the benefits of linking population, health, and environment. We have ended the project, actually. So that was an initiative from 2001 to 2007. We scaled up some of the aspects of this project. So we are actually reaching about 54 municipalities. So in fact, even if we've ended, the local communities that we work with were able to sustain the initiatives. And in fact, that's showcase that we'd like to show some of our partners in East Africa to see that a project can be sustained and can be owned by the local governments and local communities if they are provided the capacity to be able to continue to implement their programs and that they see the value of the programs that they do. we are now scaling up also the approach, and that's called the Balance Project. So I left some brochures outside to promote PHE as an approach to sustainable development in countries in East Africa that have similar parameters and variables that we worked in the Philippines. So even if we started in coastal resource management, we found out that the basic components of implementing the approach has or also works in other setups. So I think for now, I'll end with that, and if you'll be interested, then we can talk more about the project. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. I'd like to tell a story that I hope will help to sort of give an example of the kind of work that we do and what is needed in Latin America around resolution or transformation of resources around disputes around natural resources. So I'd like to try to picture ourselves in beside Segundo Vélez. Segundo is a campesino, is a mestizo. He's in the southern part of the Amazon in Ecuador, and as his father and grandfather had done, he moved forward into the forest. He cleared part of the forest, and he got a bit of land. And with another few hundreds of people, he started his growing some crops in his small piece of land there. He doesn't have a legal title to his land, and he has to travel to the capital or to some other places once in a while to try to get it, and it takes forever, and it's not happening. It happens for some people there, but not for him. He hears that his land is part of a territory that's going to be allocated for mining operations, but he's not sure about it, and he doesn't know who to ask. He asks, and he gets like mixed messages. And then he gets a visit from the Ministry of Environment and from some NGOs who tell them that, mining is not a good thing, so it can provide work, jobs, but it's divisive, and he sort of can relate to that. So this has to be a protected area. So he has the expectation that will allow him to get his legal title to his land. So he goes for it. He signs up to whatever we need to sign. So the protected area gets approved. It's sort of a low priority protected area. When he goes to the office to get his land title, he realizes that it now belongs to the Ministry of Environment, and that it's now very difficult that he can get it. So it's even more difficult than before. So he cannot get his land title. So he then receives the visit of the same officers of the Ministry of Environment and from the NGOs who say, now we have to work on the management plan for the protected area. And he's a peaceful man, but some people in his community are not. And so they draw out their machetes and they hold these people for 3 days. And these people really had a hard time, these officers and the personnel of the NGO. I mean, they were kidnapped and they were beaten really hard. The police came, they weren't able to free them, and only when the priest showed up were they, so they said our hearts were sort of softened and we let them go. But since then, no cooperation around that area was ever possible. No one could ever get in, right? So this sort of illustrates the fact that our own institutions have a real hard time and a very low capacity trying to respond to very basic demands of an enormous population in our territories. And usually what happens after this very poor response is that people sort of radicalize their ways of dealing with a conflict. So Second part of the story is that we had trained after this situation, we trained people from the Ministry of Environment, and we trained people from NGOs and indigenous peoples from around the country. Some of them lived in that area or worked close to that area. So, and we trained them in this conflict resolution mechanisms, and they asked us, so if one day we need your help, will you be there? And we said, sure, we'll be there. So a sort of a window of opportunity appeared with Segundo's community, and we got a call and we heard, listen, in 3 days we're having a meeting with these people with whom we have never been able to meet in the past year. Will you be here? And this is not really around the corner, this is like way in. And we said, sure, we'll be there, right? And we went there, and it was a very tough and a fascinating meeting, and 10 minutes is impossible to talk about it, but it was a good meeting. And it sort of started a process, a dialogue process that got some agreements. Then we had some more agreements, some difficulties came up later, but in 1 year, there was sort of a good implementation of agreements that were reached there. And so the situation diffused, violence was prevented, but there are certainly so many other things that needed to be done there. Sort of after the agreements were implemented, people started saying, okay, but we have the mining issue, we have the construction of a road here, so can we do a visioning process for this area? Will you be here? Can you do that with us? So sure, we'll be here. And that lasted for 4 years. So to me, the other thing is that even in the hardest moments of conflict, there are windows of opportunities for cooperation, and they have to be seized. We need to seize them. So the third part of the story is that there are hundreds of segundos. Segundo is not a unique person. There's many of people like him in his situation, and many conflicts like that as well, not only in Ecuador, but also in the rest of Latin America. So it doesn't seem too wise to be going after each of these conflicts when they blow up as a fireman, saying, sure, we'll be there. Right? It doesn't. I mean, sometimes I'm sure it needs to happen, but it doesn't seem to be very, very wise. So it seems to be smarter to address this at a public policy level. So go at the public policy level and say, so what's wrong with having private property in this sort of low priority protected areas? Why can't they have it? And we had a dialogue with the Ministry of Environment, and it was actually possible, and that changed. It took some time, but it changed, and it prevented lots of conflicts like this one, lots of disputes like this one. So I also believe that a dispute can provide sort of a pathway into public policy change. That's why disputes at the local level are really important. When we talk about conflict prevention, we're not talking about not having conflict. I think we're talking about preventing violence. But conflict is a very good way for Segundo Vélez to sort of be seen. Otherwise, he's invisible, right? So to do this type of work, I wanted to share like 3 insights. One is that nothing of this would have happened if our institutions had the capacity to mainstream sort of environmental considerations into other sectors' decision making. I mean, if we can definitely talk at the cabinet meeting with the president and the ministers in the same way that we talk about mining, we talk about environment, then we will certainly improve. But that's not happening. You know, there are some ministries that are really important and some others that are like nice figures, but that's it. So we really need to mainstream the environmental considerations into agriculture, in this case, the case of agriculture, but colonization in terms of mining, and many others, transport, energy, etc. But the other one is, we're not such a big organization, and it is not very easy for us to get an invitation from someone, say, can you be here in 3 days? And say, sure, we'll be there. I mean, you can do that once, but if you do this 3 times or more, or 10 times during the year, I mean, we will have to close the doors of our organization. This is not sustainable financially. And when we get asked if we can be there, we cannot respond, sure, well, we'll submit a proposal and it takes probably 6 months and we might be here. It doesn't work. That's not what they need to hear. And even if you do that, if you submit a proposal, what you will get from a funder is, so what will the outcomes be? And, tell me more about the indicators of this project. Come on, it's impossible. I mean, I can certainly give you some ideas of what may happen or may not, but I really need some flexibility here. Well, it's not going to happen under this procedures. We need a sort of a pilot project, and so we're going to do it all the same. But it's certainly not sustainable from a financial point of view or from a personal point of view, for sure. So we came up with an idea that was called the Early Action Fund. The Early Action was, the name came from, everybody really likes early warnings, but there's no early action there. So let's talk about early action a bit more. And so the premise of that was with a relatively small amount of money, the right capacities at the right time, you can prevent violence. And you can do it. And so we approached UN, the Inter-American Development Bank, the Indian Development Bank, and they were sort of kind enough to say, sure, we'll look into this, and they decided to put some money into that. And the first experiences went quite well, and we sort of proved that you can do that with flexible mechanisms or a smarter use of the money. I mean, you can address conflict over natural resources, and you could prevent violence. So one thing we're looking into now is okay, how do we scale this up? How do we mainstream this into discussion with funders? It may be some other creative ways of doing it, but I certainly think it's absolutely necessary. And, well, I had a third one, but I think with these two it's all right. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan. I'm sure you can bring that into the discussion, because I think we fortunately have time to cover a lot of territory. As I mentioned before, because we are webcasting the event, I'll ask you to wait for one of my colleagues to bring you the microphone. If you could let us know who you are and pose your question, you can direct it to one or a couple of our panelists individually, or just pose it. So who would like to kick us off in terms of asking questions? Yes, please, Steve.
Hi, I'm Steve Solomon. I'm the author of a new book actually, called Water. And I would like to direct this primarily to those who are in the freshwater ecosystems where there is not enough water to go around. We had the Israel example. How hard is it to get buy-in to allocate some water, enough water, for the ecosystems themselves? We have California, of course. We just had the court ruling on the Delta, which helped to initiate a series of negotiations. But in a region where both sides don't have enough for their own uses, how difficult is it? Have you been able to achieve that?
Gidon, before you start, I should say, if you haven't seen, and you could have easily seen if you're reading HuffPost or your book review section, Steve Solomon has a really significant, obviously a big effort, body of work on a new book called Water. So I urge you to check it out. Please, get on.
Well, you do it with great difficulty. But then you ask the difficult questions as, well, who says we don't have enough water? How are we utilizing the scarce, definitely there's water scarcity, but how are we utilizing the scarce waters that we do have? And could we utilize them differently? So in the Israeli case, 50% of the Israeli water economy, which is about 30% of fresh water and the rest is treated sewage and saline waters, goes to agriculture. And we ask difficult questions because agriculture has been part of the coming back to the land, part of a Zionist dream. We ask questions, well, does that make sense? Is making the desert bloom a sustainable practice? Should we be indeed exporting produce to Europe? And Israel exports a significant amount of vegetables and flowers. be it with fresh water or be it with treated sewage water. In fact, Israel is an exporter of potatoes to the potato country, Poland, in Eastern Europe, utilizing treated wastewater. Similarly, Jordan, some 68% of Jordan's water supply, one of the fourth most water-scarce countries on earth, goes to agriculture to grow a lot of citrus and bananas and vegetables, and a significant amount exported to the Gulf states. And we asked the even more difficult, why does this happen? And what's the underlying economics? And you come to significant water subsidies that exist for the agricultural sector that support rural communities. So it's about helping rural communities to find alternative sources of livelihood that we can then free up water for people, so that when you turn on the tap, you will have running water in your home, in Israel, in Palestine, in Jordan, to share water resources more fairly, and to bring water back to nature. That's precisely what we're trying to do. We're trying to work in all three. We also look at the domestic sector, and we ask also difficult questions. Well, how are we utilizing our water? A third of the fresh water in Israel or Palestine or Jordan in the domestic sector of drinking water is flushed down our toilets, because we utilize practices that might be appropriate, I think not appropriate either, in North America and Northern Europe, and use fresh water. I mean, okay, we might have double flush systems increasingly, but that still consumes 7 litres of water, rather than using waterless toilets or vacuum toilets. There are alternatives. And these are very difficult policy issues that we need to confront, health issues that we need to confront, regulations of enabling people in every home, in fact introducing legislation that rainwater harvesting would be part of a planning design for all new building in the region, grey water reuse, part of planning design. So there's a lot of options there, and in order to lead that debate, and we're presently leading it for the River Jordan. It's not enough, and we just concluded a set of studies by Israeli and Palestinian and Jordanian experts as to how much water do we need back in the Jordan to make it healthy. And it's not insignificant. We come to 400 million cubic meters. It's about somewhere between a quarter to a third of the historical flow. It's not easy to bring that water back. And it's not enough just to say that that's what the river needs. We need to say how we can bring that water back and at what cost. And the figures, when you hire economists that have an environmental background, are surprising. The conservation of water is, of course, much cheaper than the production. So in the Israeli case, we've come to see that we could save 400 million cubic meters of water at a cost cheaper than desalination if we were to truly introduce wise water. And that's the challenge, that Palestinians and Jordanians and Israelis together be the model of wise water use. And rather than exporting oranges and flowers that we currently do, we export the knowledge to the rest of the world, the practice. And we won't have farmers that are struggling to survive, but we'll have a much wealthier public that benefits from that knowledge that we would build.
Okay, terrific. Some more questions? Got a couple in the back there, Sajid, and then just right down in front.
Thank you. I'm Finn Longinotto. I'm with Global Green USA, Green Cross. It's one of the few NGOs that bridges both conflict area, military conflict, and effects of and the environment. And another question, if I'm afraid, for Gidon Bromberg. You mentioned some very good examples of where water brings conflicting parties together, and you were very careful to say better understanding doesn't get to peace yet. Obviously, we'd all like to see that next step. Of all the examples you mentioned, whether it's the West Bank, the aquifers, and so on, these are all local, of interest directly to people there. I'd like to see if we can get mileage out of something that is of interest to the larger world. I think it's specifically of the Peace Park, because it fires imagination, not just the symbolic, historical, religious, archaeological, all sorts of aspects, nature especially, revitalizing the habitat, reflooding for millions and millions of migrating birds, all these aspects that people beyond the region have interest in. And I think one thing that's interesting with the conflict resolution, particularly in that region, is that it needs outside involvement as well. It's going to need people from around the world, and we all have an interest in peace in the region. So here there are two areas. Peace Park, which is great to bring people together from Jordan and Israel to meet there, but it's of immense interest to archaeologists, bird watchers, architects, history buffs, religions, so many things, for a larger audience outside of the immediate region. I'm just wondering how that can be used a little bit to go from the understanding towards the peace.
So the work at the community level of working with the mayors is built on working with youth, and we have many examples where a mayor would refuse to meet with the other side until he actually saw that, or she saw that the schools were meeting. That they were scared of the the constituent implications, that they won't be elected if they're seen with the other side. But if kids are meeting together, well, maybe I can take leadership. And then the mayors of the Jordan River Valley have helped lead the ministers. So we've had the head of the Palestinian Water Authority, the Israeli Environment Minister, the Jordanian Environment Minister declare themselves as champions for the rehabilitation of the River Jordan. Does that mean that there's no longer a water dispute between Israel and Palestine, or there's no longer a conflict? No, there is. But they're working together on something very concrete where they feel that they have a constituency behind them, that they can, again, defend their action. The Peace Park, as part of the Jordan River as a whole, with its international interest, enables the economic engine that maybe is not there for the mountain aquifer or for the coastal aquifer with Gaza, because the river is holy to half of humanity. The Peace Park has not been created. It's just a proposal. There are some concrete steps that are taking place, but it's not been declared. And yet a German travel agency, Studiosus, the leading eco-political travel agency in Europe, is this year, in 2010, bringing 1,500 German tourists to look at the vision of the park. And they're paying overnight accommodation, they're paying entrance fees. That's that's part of the attraction, that's part of the international spur that helps communities and leaders to defend themselves, to take the brave steps that will lead to peace in one step, one shared river, one peace park at a time.
Okay. Just a couple rows down right in the front.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Werrell with Avoided Deforestation Partners. My question is for Juan. It seems like your organization is in what can be a rather unique position of having the trust of both the government and the community. Can you talk a little bit about how you were able to reach this level of trust and, as well as maintain it?
I love the discussion about trust. It's really, really important. I think it comes from many, many different factors. I believe that one of them is if you have a track record, it's much better. So if you've been working on this in that territory for quite a while, then you have more chances to be trusted. Then I think that the other one is that the people there sometimes have not many choices in terms of who else to go to. So it may not be a merit of ours for sure, but it's certainly an opportunity. So people may say, well, it's these guys, or we don't know who else. So let's try it with these people. And that's the way it has worked for us. I'm not trying to say that there aren't any groups like ours doing this kind of work in Ecuador or in other places. There are. But, we are not many, that's for sure.
I think it's also from previous days' discussion, it may have been Gidon or one of the participants that suggested that it was just showing up, just being there over time, and being in the setting, being local, being part of the community that was critical to these dynamics. Joan, perhaps you could also talk about it, some of those same state, civil society bridges that you have been able to build on local and national levels in the Philippines.
Thank you. Let me share with you a story that happened when we were starting the project. When we were in one of the communities, we're starting to train community leaders to become peer educators. And in that situation, one of the mayor came in. The mayor of the municipality came in and said, I don't like the topic. You're talking now about family planning that promotes promiscuity, and this is a very remote area, and I wouldn't like the project to go. So the mayor focused on the concept of family planning because that was the topic when she was coming in. And what was relevant here was that the community were the ones who said, we need this information. This is our life. And whether the mayor says you're not welcome or the project is not welcome, we'd like to help you to be able to continue with this project because we feel that the programs that we've been doing before are so vertical when our lives are integrated, and it needs integrated solutions. So what I'm trying to drive here is I think the trust building starts with being able for the community to see that it's valuable to them. The work that we do is valuable to them. It's a long process. It's not like when you go there, they will trust you right away. So it's very important that from our experience to start working with local leaders, the indigenous leaders, which is heard by the communities, to be able to push forward some of the activities, even activities that you do. And those are things that we have to contend with when we work on projects. It's really building the trust. But we as program implementors or who come in with the programs would also need to educate our leaders, because sometimes they don't trust you because they don't know what the program is all about, or they don't know what the issue is all about. So it takes what I mentioned in the meeting previously. You need to work up and you need to work down. So you work with the community, but at the same time, you have to create that collaboration and networking at the top with the local chief executives or with the leaders, so that both of you will have a shared vision. So it's not easy, but it will happen. So trust building is very important. It's actually a key to success to whatever you have to do.
I should have mentioned, too, a number of these experiences are captured in some of the focus policy briefing papers, including one authored by Joan and Leona Diagnos that you can find out front. Some other questions? Yeah, how about over here?
Hi, my name is Ruth Strandy from USAID. In terms of the Philippines and Ethiopia, we heard a lot about family planning being integrated into these environmental approaches, but I didn't really hear it as much from the Middle East or from the Latin America sectors. And I'm just wondering if you're having those conversations, and if you are, what they're entailing, and if you're not, why not, and if you're considering it in the future.
You want to start?
Go ahead.
We are struggling with that conversation. Not that we're not having it. I think there are groups that are championing that, for sure. It's very difficult for I guess the same reasons that Joan is mentioning. Religious reasons are an issue here. But I think there is lots of progress being made. Just to give you an idea of Ecuador, Ecuador has now President Correa in charge. He seems to be, or at least at the beginning, he seemed to be like sort of left-wing avant-garde president. But these issues he has a hard time touching upon. So even if we thought we had momentum for this, we don't seem to have it. All the same, I would say that there is progress being made, and if you're interested in knowing about more about who the groups are who are dealing with this, I'm happy to put you in touch.
So for us, it's actually a decision not to, at least at Friends of the Earth Middle East, not to get involved. It's not because it's not a major issue, it is. We have incredibly high population increase. But strategically, we'd be shooting ourselves in the foot. We would prevent the dialogue that we're trying to promote. Because it's not just a sustainability issue in the Middle East. It's an issue, it's a competition of populations. Each side, be it Jewish or Muslim predominantly, wants the larger population so that they can maintain their sovereignty, politically incredibly significant. And if we were to incorporate some level of family planning in our work, then we'd immediately be seen on the Arab side as part of the Zionist conspiracy, on the Jewish side as part of the Arab side of the debate. So strategically, it's wrong for us. It doesn't mean, though, that there aren't groups that work, Jordanian groups or Palestinian groups or Israeli groups that work on family planning issue. But in this case, we'd be shooting ourselves in the foot if we were to integrate that type of programming into our work.
I'll just say for Latin America, we have a brief about Propitan's work in Guatemala that has this integrated approach. And Jason Brimner at Population Reference Bureau would be an excellent source, having kind of finished in some years back his dissertation looking at this approach in Latin America. And then I think the interesting case in the Middle East is actually Iran, where immediately after the revolution, very pro-natalist policy, and at some point they said, oh my goodness, this is going to be difficult to employ all these people, and kind of went all the way back and have had a historic drop in fertility rates, largely because of education, and even, in order to get a marriage license, you have to go through as a couple family planning training and such. And so fascinating case where it breaks down some of our stereotypes of who's willing and who's not willing to take on these issues. Yes, please, ma'am.
I'm Charlotte Moser from Ecologic Institute. A question that has come up for me in hearing this excellent discussion was that water is not just a source of livelihood and culture, it's also a huge development sector. I go to lots of meetings at the World Bank about hydroelectric plants, Gobi Dam in Ethiopia. How do you approach water using your tools that you've learned in negotiations with, say, the multilateral development banks, or even the sources of huge amounts of money going into environmental support in Washington, the Global Environment Facility, those kinds of things where they may not be as sensitive to the local level?
Any iffy experiences?
Well, regarding negotiations, one issue is checking the environmental impact assessment study. Especially all development projects are subject to environmental impact assessment. And for this, the Federal Environmental Protection Authority is responsible. But still, there is lack of capacity in undertaking this environmental impact assessment. And also there is lack of knowledge, especially in decision makers level, sometimes undermining this environmental impact assessment, or sometimes just seeing this environmental impact assessment as a hindrance for development. But currently, especially donors, especially like the World Bank, they see this environmental protection or environmental impact assessment as major criteria to get funding or different support. So the government is currently undertaking this environmental impact assessment for different development projects. So environmental impact assessment is a key issue.
Yeah, one of the key sources of conflict, as you well know, is when somebody goes in to build a dam. And as you rightly point out, a lot of time that's bringing capital, and historically have been, as you point out, a lot of times would prefer to ignore the local impacts. Fortunately, there are a lot of organizations that have been trying to raise awareness, and at the global level, the World Commission on Dams did go through a process where they tried to come up with best practices for thinking about dams. One of the interesting things in terms of kind of global policy is how and who has been able to ignore those guidelines. And so maybe 15 years ago, it was primarily the development banks who would fund dams and historically wouldn't do the environmental impact assessment or the social impact assessment until the sources of capital started to press to make sure that happened in each cases. And then, interestingly, a number of countries, probably not wise to name them as we're webcasting, but decided to not take the development funds and rather use their own capital to build the dam and therefore circumvent all of these impacts. I think the most interesting thing along these lines recently is China as a major funder for dams, not just within China, which is going to have massive impact in Southeast Asia, even Central Asia. I mean, I think all of the dams, all of the rivers in the world probably have headwaters in China. So I don't know if that's a geographic fact, but certainly a lot of them do. And China has plans for dams on a lot of them because of their own development needs and own power needs. But beyond China, they are the major funder for dams around the world right now. And interestingly, within China, they're starting to feel some of that environmental pressure now. Where on the New River and on the Lancang River, they actually canceled a number of planned dams within China because the environmental impact statements weren't done. That's not happening on the dams that they're planning outside of China. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. The pressure gets put on China development to be able to do those very important steps.
In the case of in the Middle East, I can speak of a World Bank project to build a canal from the Red Sea to the Dead Sea. Received a lot of media attention, front page of the Washington Post a few years ago, without the study of alternatives, other than the no canal alternative. And we couldn't live with that, and made a lot of noise, wrote reports, but also mobilized mayors, mobilized communities, because we highlighted to mayors along the Jordan River that if a canal is built from the Red Sea, coming from the south to the Dead Sea, and bring water, it's not really about the Dead Sea, it's all about desalination, but I won't go into it. Well, what incentive will there be to allow fresh water to flow down the Jordan to the Dead Sea? So a Jordanian, a Palestinian, and an Israeli mayor came to the World Bank here in Washington, D.C., and said to the vice president of the bank, why aren't you studying an alternative for the Dead Sea? Why just the canal? How about the Jordan River? We'd been saying that for a year. But when the mayors, and the response that we got was, well, you know, we don't have to study everything, and we can study these issues later. We're telling the bank that this is against World Bank guidelines, and some threats there that will go back to the inspection panel. But really the turning point was the mayors. And when the mayors knock on the table and say, but we're the mayors of the Jordan River, and we're Palestinian, Israeli, and Jordanian, and we are insisting that you study alternatives, that was decisive. And the bank was still not happy with how they're doing it, but the bank today is studying the alternatives to the Red Dead Canal, including the rehabilitation of the River Jordan.
Yes, Kuntai in the back.
My name is Kuntai, for sure. I come from Kenya, and I just want to talk of the environmental assessment on the question to support what my colleagues say in Ethiopia. I just really want to cash a bit on the quality, especially in these minings and the dams. You must find, like, although they do impact assessment, but in this country, most I can say, let's say developing countries, they don't really involve sometimes the local communities at some point. Most of the things being discussed in national level, and although they do impact assessment, but you realize at some point after the mining in this issue, they call it compensation or settlements. They take the advantage of doing a lot of destruction. For instance, I personally faced one in Kwale and see how they do. But you realize communities who are in that land, or rather media, or rather any kind of environmental activists coming very late, or already agreements are being signed and all this. So sometimes you find these communities coming very late. So we are not really in the community level doing very good. And in developing country, I can say that are more influenced by international, or kind of for their own benefit, or not really for their own benefit, but the national level benefit. We don't really consider on more on the impact they make the environmental side of it.
Thank you, Quentin.
Yes,
please, Juan.
I'd like to follow up on your question about dams, and I was particularly interested in the case of Chile, and was involved in some work there. Chile used to trust that Argentina would continue providing gas. They had an agreement on that, and Argentina did not live up to their word. So Chile found itself without sufficient energy, and they started building up lots of thermoelectric plants. But at the same time, they started sort of to revive projects to build plenty of dams in Patagonia. And that certainly raised lots of opposition, especially to a project called Hidro Aysén, in sort of the southern end of Patagonia, which plans to build like 5 dams and then to create a 2,000-kilometer line to take the energy to Santiago. And we were asked if we wanted to mediate in that conflict between the company and the local community, and we said no. We truly thought that it was not about reaching an agreement there, but it was more important to reach an agreement at the public policy level and ask ourselves, or ask Chile asking itself, what does our energy matrix want to look like in 2040? And is this a wise decision to make, to dam all the rivers of Patagonia or not? So in a way, I think that what is happening is that as dams sort of don't have the CO2 impact, they have sort of are winning some traction, but I think it's just one side of the trade-off story. So what we have done there is we've put together a scenario building exercise. The Ministry of Energy came with a scenario. NGOs came with a scenario. The private sector did as well. So did universities. And then we had the 3 presidential candidates debating the scenarios. And so in a way, that sort of shifted the attention from a specific local conflict over one dam and tried to take the negotiations to the public policy level. In the end, if the decision is that, yeah, we need to do some dams, then the discussion just shifts. It's not about a not in my backyard thing, but it's more about, okay, then if I need to be compensated and why. So I wanted to share that. I hope it's useful.
Terrific. Well, I think we've come to a point where we've hit, I think, some of the questions. Also mindful that we have opportunity to continue over the reception, so it's not actually, we're bringing the first part to a close, and we can adjourn to the second part. As I mentioned, virtually all of our panelists have contributed to print or online video or online blogging in terms of the different resources we have available on the Wilson Center website, the wilsoncenter.org/ECSP. So I urge you to come and visit that for summary today's meeting, links to their programs and organization websites, and some of the other work that they've written to and spoke about to capture these insights. So if you all would join me in thanking them for this very rich presentation.